My wife and I were celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary in a restaurant. When I was in the restroom, a waiter approached me and whispered, "Sir, I saw your wife put something in your drink." I laughed it off, thinking he was mistaken. But when I returned, I quietly swapped our glasses while she wasn't looking. 15 minutes later. A decade of marriage to Camille, and I thought I knew everything about her. We'd been through the usual ups and downs, job changes, family drama, the stress of buying our first house. But sitting across from her at Romano's, our favorite Italian place, I felt like we were finally in a good place. The candlelight flickered across her face as she smiled at me, raising her wine glass. "To 10 more years," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "To 10 more years," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. The evening had been perfect so far. Camille had worn the blue dress I bought her for our 5th anniversary, and she'd even let me choose the restaurant this time. We'd been laughing about our honeymoon disasters, the food poisoning in Mexico, the lost luggage, the hotel room with the broken air conditioning. Good memories now, even if they'd been stressful at the time. "I'll be right back," I said, standing up. "Don't let them take my food." She laughed. "I make no promises if it gets cold." The restroom was down a narrow hallway past the kitchen. As I was washing my hands, the door opened behind me. I glanced up to see Mathis, our waiter, looking nervous and fidgety. "Sir," he said quietly, glancing back toward the door. "I need to tell you something." I turned, drying my hands on the paper towel. Mathis was young, maybe 22, with that earnest look that reminded me of my younger brother. He'd been attentive all evening, refilling our water glasses without being asked, timing the courses perfectly. "What's up?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "This is really awkward, but I saw your wife put something in your drink. When you got up, she took a small packet out of her purse and poured it into your wine glass. I thought you should know." I stared at him for a moment, then let out a laugh. "You're kidding, right?" "I'm not, sir. I saw it happen." She was looking around to make sure no one was watching, but I was coming back from the kitchen and I saw everything. The smile faded from my face. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." I debated whether to say anything, but if someone was doing that to my wife, I'd want to know. My mind raced. Camille wouldn't. Would she? We'd had our problems, sure, but nothing that would warrant. What? Drugging me? It was absurd. "Maybe you saw wrong," I said. "Maybe she was just adding sugar or something." Mathis shook his head. "It wasn't sugar, sir. It was a small white packet, like the kind." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Like the kind what?" "Like the kind you might get from someone who wants to make you sick. Or worse." The words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned against the sink, my reflection staring back at me in the mirror. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of thinking I knew the woman I'd pledged my life to. "Thank you," I managed to say. "For telling me." "I'm sorry, sir. I really am." I walked back to our table in a daze. Camille was scrolling through her phone, smiling at something on the screen. She looked up when I approached, and for a moment, I searched her face for any sign of guilt, any tell that might give her away. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You look pale." "Just tired," I said, sitting down. "Long week." My wine glass sat exactly where I'd left it, the dark red liquid seemingly innocent. Camille's glass was next to it, identical in every way except for whatever might be lurking in mine. "You know what?" I said, forcing a smile. "I think I'm going to switch to water. This wine is giving me a headache." "Oh, that's too bad," Camille said, but there was something in her voice. Relief? Disappointment? "You picked such a nice bottle too." "You can finish it," I said. "I don't mind." She shook her head. "I've had enough. I'm already feeling it a little." I picked up my glass and pretended to take a sip, but kept my lips closed. Camille was watching me carefully, and when I set the glass down, she seemed to relax slightly. "I'm going to powder my nose," she said, standing up. "Order dessert if you want." The moment she walked away, I grabbed both wine glasses and quickly switched them. My heart was pounding as I set them back down, making sure they were in the exact same positions. If Mathis was wrong, no harm done. If he was right. Camille returned a few minutes later, sliding back into her seat with a smile. "Did you order dessert?" "I was waiting for you," I said. "What do you think? Tiramisu?" "Perfect," she said, reaching for her wine glass. My wine glass. The one that might contain whatever she'd put in mine. I watched as she took a long sip, then another. She was talking about something, her sister's upcoming wedding, I think, but I wasn't really listening. I was counting the minutes, waiting to see what would happen. 15 minutes later, Camille stopped mid-sentence and blinked hard. "I feel strange," she said, her words slightly slurred. "Strange how?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. She put a hand to her forehead. "Dizzy. Really dizzy. And my mouth feels weird." She looked at me with confused eyes. "Dale, I think something's wrong." I stood up and moved to her side of the table. "Let me help you." "I don't understand," she said, gripping my arm. "I only had a little wine. Why do I feel so?" Her words trailed off as her eyes grew heavy. I caught her as she started to slump forward. "Camille? Camille, can you hear me?" She mumbled something incoherent, her head lolling against my shoulder. Around us, other diners were starting to notice. I heard someone say they were calling 911. "It's okay," I said loudly enough for others to hear. "She's had too much to drink. This happens sometimes." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Camille could handle her alcohol better than most people I knew. Whatever she'd put in that wine glass, it was strong enough to knock her out. The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they loaded Camille onto a stretcher, I rode with them to the hospital, playing the concerned husband perfectly. Inside, though, my mind was racing with questions. Why would she want to drug me? What was her plan once I was unconscious? At the hospital, they ran blood tests and confirmed what I already suspected. Camille had been drugged with a powerful sedative. The doctor said she was lucky. The dose could have been dangerous if she'd been smaller or had any underlying health conditions. Has your wife been acting strangely lately? The doctor asked. Any changes in behavior or mood? I almost laughed at the irony. Not that I noticed, I said. We were just celebrating our anniversary. Camille was unconscious for 6 hours. When she finally woke up, she was groggy and confused, with no memory of the evening after arriving at the restaurant. I stayed by her bedside, holding her hand, playing the devoted husband while my mind worked through the implications of what had happened. I don't understand, she kept saying. How did I get so drunk? I barely had anything. The doctor thinks someone might have put something in your drink, I said carefully. Maybe when you went to the restroom. Her eyes widened with what looked like genuine fear. Someone drugged me? It looks that way, I said. I'm so sorry, honey. I should have been more careful. She squeezed my hand. It's not your fault. Oh, Dale, what if something worse had happened? I squeezed back, marveling at her performance. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have been completely convinced by her act. We went home the next morning, and I spent the day taking care of her while she recovered. She was weak and nauseous, side effects from whatever she'd taken. I brought her soup, made sure she stayed hydrated, and listened to her theories about who might have drugged her. Maybe it was that creepy guy at the bar, she said. He kept looking at me when I walked by. Maybe, I agreed, though we both knew she'd never been near the bar. Or maybe someone put something in the wine bottle before it got to our table. That's possible, right? Anything's possible, I said. But while I was playing the supportive husband, I was also planning. I needed to know why Camille had tried to drug me, and I needed evidence of what she'd done. The police had taken the wine glasses from the restaurant, but that would only prove she'd been drugged, not that she'd done it to herself by accident. I started watching her more carefully. I noticed things I'd missed before, the way she would check her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, how she'd become protective of her purse, the fact that she'd started working late more often in the past few months. 3 days after the restaurant incident, I found my first real clue. Camille had gone to work, claiming she was feeling better and needed to catch up on some projects. I was working from home that day, and during my lunch break, I decided to do something I'd never done before in 10 years of marriage. I went through her things. I felt guilty about it, but the alternative was continuing to live with someone who'd tried to drug me without knowing why. I started with her dresser, then moved to her desk in our home office. I was about to give up when I remembered the small jewelry box she kept on her nightstand. Inside, under a tray of earrings, I found a small plastic bag containing white powder and a note written in Camille's handwriting. Use sparingly. Should take effect in 15 to 20 minutes. Duration 6 to 8 hours. My hand shook as I read it. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. She'd planned this. She'd gotten the drugs from somewhere, taken notes on how to use them, and waited for the right opportunity. But why? I took pictures of everything with my phone, then carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Then I called in sick to work and spent the rest of the day going through every inch of our house. I found more evidence in her laptop, hidden in a folder labeled recipes. There were emails to someone named Lars, discussing the plan and making sure he's out long enough. The emails were flirtatious, full of inside jokes and references I didn't understand. Lars. I'd heard that name before. He was a guy from Camille's work, someone she'd mentioned in passing a few times. Apparently, he was more than just a colleague. The final piece of the puzzle was in her car. I found a spare key to our house that I'd never seen before, along with a note that said, "Hide this where you'll never find it. We'll need it when the time comes." I sat in the driver's seat of Camille's car, staring at the key and the note, feeling like my entire world had been turned upside down. My wife of 10 years was having an affair, and she'd planned to drug me so she could. What? Bring Lars to our house? Clean out our bank accounts? I couldn't even imagine what they'd been planning. That evening, Camille came home from work acting completely normal. She asked about my day, told me about a difficult client she'd dealt with, and suggested we order Chinese food for dinner. If I hadn't known what I knew, I never would have suspected anything. "How are you feeling?" I asked as we ate lo mein on the couch. "Any lingering effects from the other night?" "Much better," she said. "I think I'm finally back to normal." "Good," I said. "I was worried about you." She smiled and kissed my cheek. "You're the best husband a girl could ask for." The words felt like a knife to my chest. I excused myself and went to bed early, claiming I had a headache. Camille joined me an hour later, and I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been planning to betray me. I spent the next week gathering more evidence. I installed tracking software on her phone when she was in the shower. I followed her to work twice, confirming that she was indeed having an affair with Lars. I even hired a private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Renee who specialized in cheating spouses. "She's been seeing him for at least 6 months, Renee told me a week later. They meet at a hotel downtown every Tuesday and Friday. Yesterday, I heard them talking about how they were going to celebrate after you were out of the picture." "Out of the picture how?" I asked. "They're planning to drug you again, but this time they want to keep you unconscious long enough to empty your bank accounts and disappear. They've got fake IDs, plane tickets to Mexico, the whole 9 yards." I felt sick. "When?" "Soon. They're getting impatient. I heard the woman say something about doing it this weekend." "This weekend?" Our anniversary dinner had been on a Saturday, and now it was Thursday. They were planning to drug me again in 2 days. I thanked Renee and paid him, then went home to plan my revenge. Camille was in the kitchen when I got home, making dinner and humming to herself. She looked so normal, so innocent, that I almost couldn't believe what I'd learned. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek. "Good," I said. "How was yours?" "Oh, the usual. Boring meetings, difficult clients." She smiled. "But I'm glad to be home with you." I helped her set the table, and we ate dinner while she told me about her day. She was a good liar, I realized. She'd probably been lying to me for months, and I'd never suspected a thing. "I was thinking," she said as we cleaned up. "Maybe we should have another celebration dinner this weekend. To make up for what happened last time." "That's a great idea," I said. "Where do you want to go?" "How about Romano's again? I feel like we should go back there, show that we're not scared." I nodded. "Sure. Saturday night?" "Perfect." After dinner, Camille said she was going to take a bath and go to bed early. I waited until I heard the water running, then went to my home office and started making calls. The first call was to my lawyer, Bastian, who'd handled the paperwork when we bought our house. I explained the situation and asked him to prepare divorce papers. He was shocked but professional, and promised to have everything ready by Friday. The second call was to my brother Victor, who lived across town. Victor was a cop, and when I told him what was happening, he was furious. "She tried to drug you?" he said. "Dale, that's a serious crime. You need to file a report." "I will," I said. "But I want to catch her in the act first. I want there to be no doubt about what she's doing." Victor was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be there when it happens. I need a witness, preferably one with a badge." "Consider it done," he said. "But Dale, be careful. If she's desperate enough to drug you, there's no telling what else she might do." The third call was to Mathis, the waiter from Romano's. I'd gotten his number from the restaurant manager, explaining that I wanted to thank him for his help. When I called, I asked him to work our table again on Saturday night, and to be ready to call the police if I gave him a signal. "Are you setting her up?" he asked. "I'm giving her the opportunity to do what she's planning to do anyway," I said. "The only difference is that this time, I'll be ready." Friday passed in a blur. Camille went to work as usual, and I used the day to finalize my preparations. I met with my lawyer, who gave me the divorce papers and explained my options. I moved most of our money to a separate account that only I could access. I even packed a bag and left it at Victor's house, just in case. That evening, Camille was more affectionate than she'd been in months. She cooked my favorite meal, opened a bottle of wine, and suggested we watch a movie together. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have thought we were having a romantic evening. "I love you," she said as we cuddled on the couch. "I love you too," I replied, the words feeling hollow in my mouth. Saturday arrived with unseasonably warm weather. Camille spent the day shopping, claiming she wanted to buy a new dress for our dinner. I spent the day reviewing my plan, making sure I hadn't missed anything. At 6 o'clock, we got ready for dinner. Camille wore a black dress I'd never seen before, and she'd had her hair done that afternoon. She looked beautiful, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what we'd lost. "You look gorgeous," I said, and meant it. "Thank you," she said, smiling. "I wanted tonight to be special." We drove to Romano's in relative silence. Camille seemed nervous, fidgeting with her purse and checking her phone repeatedly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just excited," she said. "I've been looking forward to this all week." "I'll bet you have," I thought. Romano's was busy, but Mathis had saved us the same table we'd had the week before. He greeted us warmly, and I could see the recognition in his eyes when he looked at Camille. "Welcome back," he said. "I hope you'll have a better evening than last time." "I'm sure we will," Camille said, but there was something strained in her voice. We ordered the same wine as before, and I made sure to keep my glass in sight at all times. Camille was more talkative than usual, telling stories about her childhood and asking me questions about my plans for the future. "Do you ever think about traveling more?" she asked. "Maybe taking a long vacation somewhere exotic?" "Sometimes," I said. "Where would you want to go?" "Mexico, maybe. Or somewhere in South America. Somewhere we could disappear for a while." I nearly choked on my wine. "Disappear?" "You know what I mean. Get away from everything. Work, stress, all of it." "That sounds nice," I said. Halfway through dinner, Camille excused herself to go to the restroom. The moment she was out of sight, I signaled to Mathis, who nodded and moved to a position where he could see our table clearly. Camille returned a few minutes later, and I watched her carefully as she sat down. She seemed more relaxed than before, and she kept glancing at my wine glass. "You're not drinking much," she observed. "I'm pacing myself," I said. "After what happened last week, I want to be careful." "Of course," she said. "That's smart." "I'm going to the restroom," I said, standing up. "Okay," she said, not looking up from her phone. I walked to the restroom, but instead of going inside, I positioned myself where I could see our table. Camille was alone for less than a minute, but it was enough. I watched as she reached into her purse, pulled out a small packet, and poured its contents into what she thought was my wine glass. I waited another minute, then returned to the table. Camille was smiling, more relaxed than I'd seen her all evening. "Miss me?" I asked. "Always," she said. I sat down and made a show of reaching for my wine glass, then stopped. "You know what? I think I'm going to switch to water. I'm not feeling great." "Oh no," Camille said, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Maybe you should drink something." Wine might help settle your stomach. I don't think so, I said. I think I'll just stick with water. I waited until she was distracted by something on her phone, then quickly switched our glasses again. My heart was pounding, but I managed to do it without her noticing. Camille picked up her wine glass, the one with the drugs in it, and took a sip. Then another. She was trying to look casual, but I could see her hands shaking slightly. Are you okay? I asked. You seem nervous. I'm fine, she said, taking another sip. Just tired. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I pretended to eat while watching Camille carefully. She was fighting the effects of whatever she'd put in the wine, but I could see it was starting to take hold. Dale, she said, her words slightly slurred. I don't feel well. What's wrong? I asked, pulling out my phone. Should I call someone? I don't know, she said, gripping the edge of the table. I feel dizzy. I stood up and walked around to her side of the table. Let me help you. I don't understand, she said, her eyes unfocused. How did this happen again? I knelt beside her chair and took her hand. Camille, I said quietly, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She looked at me with confusion. What? I know what you did, I said. I know about Lars. I know about the plan. I know about everything. Her eyes widened with what little awareness she had left. Dale, You tried to drug me, I said. Twice. But this time, I was ready for you. She tried to speak, but the words came out as mumbles. The drug was taking full effect now, and she was struggling to stay conscious. Mathis appeared at my side. Sir, should I call 911? Yes, I said. And call the police too. Tell them we have a situation here. I looked down at Camille, who was barely conscious now. I loved you, I said. For 10 years, I loved you. And you were going to throw it all away for someone you've known for 6 months. She mumbled something that might have been sorry, but I couldn't be sure. The paramedics arrived first, followed by the police. Victor showed up with them, and I explained the situation to the responding officers. They took statements from me, Mathis, and several other witnesses who had seen Camille acting strangely. At the hospital, the blood tests confirmed what we already knew. Camille had been drugged with the same substance as the week before. This time, however, there was video evidence from the restaurant's security cameras showing her putting something in the wine glass. When Camille woke up several hours later, she found herself under arrest. The charges included attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, and several other felonies. Lars was arrested at the same time, caught at the hotel where he'd been waiting for Camille to call and tell him the coast was clear. I filed for divorce the following Monday. Camille tried to call me from jail, but I refused to take her calls. My lawyer handled all communication with her attorney. During the weeks following Camille's arrest, more details about their plan emerged. The police investigation revealed that Lars had been feeding Camille lies about me for months, convincing her that I was having an affair myself and that I was planning to divorce her and leave her with nothing. He'd even shown her doctored photos and fake text messages to support his claims. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became that Lars was the real mastermind. He'd done this before. Police found evidence of at least 2 other relationships where he'd manipulated married women into betraying their husbands. In one case, he'd convinced a woman named Heidi to steal her husband's identity and max out their credit cards. In another, he talked a woman named Annette into taking out a life insurance policy on her husband and then arranging an accident. The realization that Camille had been manipulated didn't excuse what she'd done, but it did help me understand how she'd gotten to that point. Lars was a predator who specifically targeted married women with money, and Camille had been his latest mark. The investigation also revealed the full scope of their plan. They hadn't just intended to drug me and rob me, they'd planned to make it look like I'd committed suicide. Lars had researched how to make it appear that I'd overdosed on sleeping pills, and they'd even prepared a fake suicide note blaming my supposed depression and financial troubles. When I learned about this, I felt physically sick. Not only had Camille been willing to betray our marriage, she'd been prepared to end my life to cover her tracks. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 10 years had been planning my murder. My lawyer, Bastian, was incredible throughout the entire process. He not only handled my divorce proceedings but also helped coordinate with the prosecutor's office to make sure Camille and Lars faced the maximum penalties possible. You're lucky to be alive, he told me one afternoon as we reviewed the evidence. If you hadn't switched those glasses, you'd be dead right now, and they'd probably have gotten away with it. The thought haunted me. How close had I come to dying that night? What if Mathis hadn't spoken up? What if I'd been too trusting to take his warning seriously? During the pretrial proceedings, I learned more about Lars's background. He was 35, unmarried, and had been fired from 3 different jobs for inappropriate behavior with female colleagues. He'd served time for fraud once before, and he'd been investigated for domestic violence in 2 different states. Camille's background was more complicated. I'd known her since college, and I thought I understood her completely. But the investigation revealed that she'd been struggling with debt and depression for months before meeting Lars. She'd been secretly gambling online, and she'd lost nearly $20,000 of our savings without telling me. When Lars approached her at a work conference, she'd been vulnerable and desperate. He presented himself as her savior, offering her a way out of her financial troubles and emotional pain. All she had to do was trust him and follow his plan. The manipulation had been subtle at first. Lars would send her articles about cheating spouses and divorce statistics. He'd point out every small argument we had as evidence that our marriage was failing. He'd convince her that I was probably having an affair too, and that she needed to protect herself before I left her. Over time, he'd escalated his manipulation. He'd introduced her to other women who'd supposedly been in similar situations. He'd shown her bank statements and property records that he claimed proved I was hiding assets from her. He'd even hired actors to pretend to be people who'd seen me with other women. By the time Lars suggested drugging me, Camille had been so thoroughly manipulated that she believed she was acting in self-defense. She thought she was protecting herself from a cheating husband who was planning to abandon her. None of this excused what she'd done, but it helped me understand how my wife of 10 years had become someone I didn't recognize. Lars was a professional manipulator, and Camille had been his victim long before she'd become his accomplice. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on the first day, telling the jury about both restaurant incidents and explaining how I'd uncovered the plot. The prosecutor played the security footage from Romano's, showing Camille clearly putting something in what she thought was my wine glass. Mathis testified on the second day, describing what he'd seen the first night and how he decided to warn me. His testimony was powerful. Here was a young man who'd risked his job and potentially his safety to help a stranger. I kept thinking about how I'd feel if someone was doing this to my mother or my sister, he said. I couldn't just stand there and let it happen. The defense tried to paint Camille as a victim of Lars's manipulation, and to some extent, they were right. But the evidence of her participation was overwhelming. The emails, the text messages, the video footage, it all showed a woman who'd made conscious choices to betray her husband. Lars's testimony was particularly disturbing. He showed no remorse for what he'd done, and he even tried to blame me for driving Camille to desperation. If Dale had been a better husband, he said, Camille never would have needed to look elsewhere for support. The prosecutor's cross-examination destroyed him. She presented evidence of his previous crimes, his pattern of targeting married women, and his detailed plans for my murder. By the time she was finished, it was clear that Lars was exactly what she'd called him, a predator who destroyed families for profit. Camille's testimony was harder to watch. She broke down several times, apologizing to me and to her family. She admitted that she'd been manipulated, but she also acknowledged that she'd made choices that had hurt people she loved. I know what I did was wrong, she said through tears. I know I can't take it back. Dale didn't deserve any of this. He was a good husband, and I threw away the best thing in my life because I was scared and stupid. Her parents were in the courtroom every day, and I could see the pain in their faces. They'd raised Camille to be better than this, and they were devastated by what she'd become. Her mother approached me during a recess one day. I'm so sorry, she said, crying. We never raised her to be like this. We don't understand how she could have done this to you. I felt bad for them. They were victims too, in their own way. They'd lost their daughter just as surely as I'd lost my wife. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Camille was convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and several other charges. Lars was convicted of the same charges, plus additional counts related to his manipulation and fraud. At sentencing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I'd written it out carefully, wanting to make sure I said everything I needed to say. Camille wasn't just my wife, I told the court. She was my best friend, my partner, my confidant. For 10 years, I trusted her with my life, my heart, and my future. I never imagined that she would try to take all of that away from me. The betrayal is almost harder to bear than the attempted murder. At least if a stranger had tried to kill me, I wouldn't have to deal with the knowledge that someone I loved was capable of such evil. But I want the court to know that I'm not broken by this. I'm angry, and I'm hurt, but I'm also grateful. I'm grateful that Mathis had the courage to warn me. I'm grateful that I had the wisdom to listen. And I'm grateful that justice is being served today. Camille will have years in prison to think about what she's done. I hope she uses that time to become a better person. But I also hope that her sentence sends a message to other people who might be tempted to solve their problems through violence and betrayal. There are always other options, always other ways to handle difficult situations. Choosing violence and deception only leads to more pain for everyone involved. The judge sentenced Camille to 12 years in prison. Lars got 25 years, with the possibility of parole after 15. The judge called their plan one of the most callous and calculating attempts at murder she'd ever seen, and she noted that only luck and quick thinking had prevented a tragedy. After the sentencing, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring back the 10 years I'd invested in my marriage. It didn't erase the betrayal or restore my ability to trust completely. But it did give me closure. I knew that Camille and Lars would face consequences for their actions, and I knew that I'd done everything I could to protect myself and seek justice. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward, given everything that had occurred. Since Camille was in prison and facing such serious charges, she didn't contest anything. I got the house, the cars, and most of our shared assets. Her gambling debts became her responsibility alone, though I doubt she'll ever be able to pay them back. I did make one gesture that surprised even me. I set up a small fund to help pay for Camille's legal fees during her appeals process. Not because I wanted her to get out of prison, but because I believed everyone deserved competent legal representation, even people who'd tried to kill me. My lawyer thought I was crazy, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. I didn't want to contribute to Camille's suffering any more than necessary. I wanted justice, not revenge, and there's a difference between the two. The house felt different after the trial ended. Not just because Camille was gone, but because the uncertainty was gone too. For months, I'd been living in limbo, not knowing what the future would hold. Now I knew that Camille would be in prison for years, and I could finally start planning for a future without her. I threw myself into home improvement projects. I repainted every room, replaced the flooring in the kitchen and bathrooms, and completely renovated the master bedroom. I wanted to erase every trace of Camille's presence and make the space completely my own. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Elise, who specialized in helping victims of domestic violence and betrayal trauma. She helped me understand that what Camille had done to me was a form of domestic violence, even though I'd never thought of it that way. Attempted murder by a spouse is one of the most severe forms of domestic abuse, she explained during one of our sessions. The fact that it was planned and premeditated makes it even worse. You're dealing with complex trauma, and it's going to take time to heal. Dr. Elise helped me work through my anger, my grief, and my trust issues. She taught me that it was normal to feel betrayed not just by Camille, but by my own judgment. How had I lived with someone for 10 years without realizing what she was capable of? You trusted her because that's what you do when you love someone, she said. That's not a weakness, it's a strength. Don't let Camille's betrayal turn you into someone who can't love or trust again. The therapy helped, but it was slow going. There were days when I felt angry and bitter, when I wished I'd never met Camille at all. There were other days when I missed her terribly, when I mourned not just the woman she'd been, but the woman I'd thought she was. 6 months after the trial, I decided to take a vacation. I'd been working constantly, both to distract myself and to rebuild my finances after the legal expenses. But I needed a break, a chance to clear my head and figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I chose to visit my college roommate, Tobias, who lived in Colorado. Tobias had been supportive throughout the entire ordeal, calling regularly and offering to fly out for the trial. He'd been married to his wife Sophie for 8 years, and they had 2 young children. Spending time with Tobias's family was both healing and difficult. It reminded me of what I'd lost, but it also showed me what was still possible. Tobias and Sophie had the kind of marriage I thought Camille and I had, built on trust, communication, and genuine affection. I'm sorry this happened to you, Sophie said one evening as we sat on their back porch, watching their kids play in the yard. But I'm glad you're okay. And I'm glad you fought back. Some days I wonder if I should have just walked away, I admitted. Maybe if I'd confronted Camille directly instead of setting up that elaborate trap, things would have turned out differently. Tobias shook his head. You did what you had to do to protect yourself. If you'd confronted her, she and Lars might have just changed the plan. They might have tried something even worse. He was probably right, but I still struggled with guilt sometimes. Not guilt for what I'd done to Camille, she deserved to face consequences for her actions. But guilt for how I'd handled the situation, for the deception I'd used to trap her. Dr. Elise had assured me that what I'd done was justified self-defense, but it was still hard to accept. I'd always prided myself on being honest and straightforward, and the elaborate scheme I'd used to catch Camille felt like a betrayal of my own values. You adapted to survive, Dr. Elise had told me. That's what healthy people do when they're faced with threats. You didn't become a bad person, you became a smart person. During my week in Colorado, I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do next. I was only 35 years old. I had my health, my career, and my freedom. I could do anything I wanted with the rest of my life. For the first time since the night at Romano's, I felt hopeful about the future. I started thinking about traveling more, maybe taking some of the risks I'd been too cautious to take when I was married. I considered changing careers, maybe starting my own business. I even thought about dating, though that still felt scary and premature. When I returned home, I had a new sense of purpose. I continued my therapy sessions, but I also started volunteering with a local organization that helped victims of domestic violence. I wanted to use my experience to help other people who'd been betrayed by people they trusted. My first client was a woman named Madeline whose husband had been stealing money from their joint accounts to fund a gambling addiction. She discovered the theft when she tried to pay their mortgage and found that their savings account was empty. I don't know who he is anymore, she told me during our first meeting. We've been married for 15 years, and I thought I knew everything about him. How could he lie to me for so long? I recognized the pain in her voice. It was the same pain I'd felt when I discovered Camille's betrayal. The person you married is still in there somewhere, I told her. But he's made choices that have changed him. The question now is whether you can live with those choices, or whether you need to protect yourself. Helping Madeline and other victims gave me a sense of purpose that I'd been missing. I couldn't undo what had happened to me, but I could use my experience to help other people navigate similar situations. A year after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. Mathis, the waiter from Romano's, stopped by my house one evening. He was nervous and apologetic about bothering me at home, but he said he had something important to tell me. I've been thinking about that night a lot, he said. About what I saw and what I did. I wanted to make sure you knew that I don't regret speaking up, even though it was scary. I invited him in for coffee, and we talked for over an hour. I realized that I want to do something that matters, he said. I want to help people, not just serve them food. He'd enrolled in the police academy and was training to become a law enforcement officer. He said that helping me had shown him that he wanted to dedicate his life to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. You saved my life, I told him. I'll never be able to repay you for that. You don't need to repay me, he said. Just keep living your life. That's enough. After Mathis left, I sat in my living room thinking about how many people had been affected by what Camille and Lars had done. Not just me, but Mathis, Camille's parents, Lars's previous victims, and everyone who'd followed the story in the news. One person's choice to betray trust and choose violence had created ripple effects that touched dozens of lives. But those ripple effects weren't all negative. Mathis had found his calling. I'd discovered my own strength and resilience. Camille's evil had been real and devastating, but it hadn't won. Good people had stood up to it, and justice had prevailed. That gave me hope not just for my own future, but for the world in general. 18 months after that horrible anniversary dinner, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. The therapy sessions with Dr. Elise had helped tremendously, but the real healing had come from time and from building new relationships based on honesty and trust. I'd started dating again, cautiously at first. My first attempt had been a disaster. I'd met a woman named Claire through a dating app, and I'd been so paranoid about her motives that I'd actually run a background check on her before our second date. She'd found out and, understandably, had ended things immediately. You can't live your life assuming everyone is Camille, Dr. Elise had told me after I'd related the story. You need to find a balance between being cautious and being open to new experiences. My second attempt at dating had gone better. I'd met Nina at a volunteer event for the domestic violence organization. She was a social worker who'd been helping victims of abuse for over a decade. She understood trauma in a way that most people couldn't, and she was patient with my trust issues. I've worked with a lot of people who've been betrayed by spouses, she'd told me early in our relationship. What happened to you was extreme, but the feelings you're dealing with are normal. Trust takes time to rebuild. Nina and I had been dating for 6 months now, and I was amazed by how different this relationship felt from my marriage to Camille. With Camille, I'd fallen into comfortable routines and assumptions. With Nina, everything was intentional and discussed. We talked openly about our fears, our boundaries, and our expectations. It helped that Nina had been through her own betrayal. Her ex-husband had been emotionally abusive, and she'd learned the importance of recognizing red flags early. We were both cautious people now, but we were cautious together. I still go to Romano's sometimes, and Mathis always takes good care of me. He's become something of a local hero, the waiter who helped catch a would-be poisoner. The restaurant had given him a raise and a commendation, and the story of his quick thinking had been featured in several hospitality industry publications. But Mathis wasn't content to rest on his heroism. True to his word, he'd graduated from the police academy and was now working as a patrol officer. He'd stopped by the restaurant one evening when Nina and I were having dinner, wearing his new uniform with obvious pride. "Officer Mathis," I'd said, standing up to shake his hand. "That has a nice ring to it." He grinned. "It feels good. I'm finally doing what I'm supposed to be doing." We'd talked for a few minutes about his training and his new job. He was working the night shift in a rough part of town, but he loved it. He said every time he helped someone in trouble, he thought about that night when he decided to speak up instead of staying silent. The anniversary of the poisoning incident had been difficult to navigate. I'd considered ignoring it entirely, but Dr. Elise had suggested acknowledging it in a positive way instead of pretending it hadn't happened. Anniversaries of traumatic events can be triggers, she'd explained. But they can also be opportunities to reflect on how far you've come. So instead of hiding from the date, I'd organized a small gathering at my house. Victor, my brother, had come over, along with Nina, Mathis, and a few other friends who'd supported me through the ordeal. We'd had dinner together, not Italian food, but Nina's homemade barbecue, and we talked about resilience and second chances. "A year ago, I thought my life was over," I told the group. "Not just because someone tried to kill me, but because everything I believed about my marriage and my judgment had been shattered. I felt like I couldn't trust anyone, including myself." I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd become important to me. But being here with all of you, I realized that Camille and Lars didn't destroy my ability to trust. They just taught me to be more careful about who I trust and why. Mathis had raised his glass. To Dale, for having the courage to fight back. To Mathis, for having the courage to speak up, I'd replied. To all of us, Nina had added, for refusing to let evil people win. The investigation into Lars's other crimes had continued long after his sentencing. Police departments in 3 different states had reopened cases involving suspicious deaths and disappearances connected to women Lars had been involved with. While they hadn't been able to prove he'd been directly responsible for any murders, they'd found evidence that he'd been manipulating vulnerable women for years. One case in particular had stuck with me. A woman named Greta had died in what appeared to be a car accident 6 months after meeting Lars. The police had originally ruled it an accident, but when they re-examined the evidence, they'd found suspicious financial transactions and evidence that Greta had been planning to leave her husband before her death. Greta's daughter, Sabine, had reached out to me after reading about my case in the news. She'd wanted to thank me for coming forward and helping to expose Lars's pattern of behavior. "I always suspected there was more to my mother's death than what the police told us," she'd written in her letter. She'd been acting strangely in the months before she died, and she'd been secretive about a new friend she'd met at work. Now I understand what was happening to her. Sabine had been working with the police to build a case against Lars for her mother's death. While it would be difficult to prove murder after so many years, she said that knowing the truth had brought her family some peace. "Lars may have gotten away with killing my mother," she'd written, "but he'll never hurt anyone else again. That's thanks to people like you who had the courage to stand up to him." I'd written back to Sabine, sharing some of the resources that had helped me heal from my own trauma. We'd continued to correspond, and she'd become another reminder of how one person's courage to speak the truth could have far-reaching positive effects. The domestic violence organization where I volunteered had asked me to speak at several events about my experience. At first, I'd been reluctant. I didn't want to be defined by what had happened to me. But as I'd started sharing my story, I'd realized how powerful it could be for other people who'd been betrayed by people they trusted. One speech in particular had been memorable. I'd been speaking to a group of law enforcement officers about recognizing signs of domestic manipulation and coercion. After my presentation, a detective named Astrid had approached me. "I've been working domestic violence cases for 15 years, she'd said, and I've never heard anyone explain the emotional manipulation aspect so clearly. Would you be willing to help us train our officers on what to look for?" I'd agreed, and now I regularly worked with the police department to help them understand the psychology of domestic abuse cases. It was rewarding work, and it felt like a way to turn my terrible experience into something that could help protect other people. Nina had been supportive of my volunteer work, though she'd sometimes worried that I was spending too much time focused on trauma and not enough time focused on healing and moving forward. "I understand why this work is important to you," she'd said one evening as we walked through the park near my house. "But I want to make sure you're not getting stuck in the past. You've built a good life now. You deserve to enjoy it." She was right, of course. There was a danger in defining myself entirely by what Camille and Lars had done to me. I was more than just a victim of attempted murder. I was a successful professional, a good friend, a loving partner to Nina, and hopefully someday, a husband and father again. That last thought still scared me sometimes. The idea of marriage felt overwhelming, given what I'd been through. But Nina and I had started talking about the future, and I could see myself taking that leap of faith again, when the time was right. Do you think you'll ever be able to trust someone completely again? Nina had asked me one night as we lay in bed together. I don't know, I'd answered honestly. I thought I trusted Camille completely, and look how that turned out. Maybe complete trust is overrated. Maybe a little healthy skepticism is actually a good thing. Maybe, she'd agreed. But I hope you don't close yourself off from love because of what she did. I won't, I promised. Being with you has shown me that I'm still capable of loving and being loved. That's something Camille and Lars couldn't take away from me. The house had undergone another transformation since Nina and I had started dating seriously. She'd helped me redecorate again, this time focusing on making it feel like a home where we could both be comfortable. We'd painted the guest room to serve as her home office, and we'd planted a garden together in the backyard. This place has good bones, she'd said one weekend as we worked on installing new kitchen cabinets. It just needed someone to love it properly. I'd thought about that comment for a long time. The house had been tainted by Camille's betrayal, but it didn't have to stay that way forever. With time and care and new memories, it was becoming something different, not the place where I'd been deceived, but the place where I'd learned to trust again. My relationship with Camille's parents had been complicated to navigate. They'd reached out to me several times since the trial, alternating between apologies and requests for me to visit Camille in prison. I declined the visits, but I'd maintained a cordial relationship with them. We know what she did was unforgivable, her mother had said during one phone call. But she's still our daughter. We have to hope that she can become a better person. I'd understood their position, even if I couldn't share their optimism about Camille's potential for redemption. They were good people who'd raised what they thought was a good daughter. Camille's choices weren't their fault, and they didn't deserve to lose their relationship with me on top of everything else they'd lost. I'd continued to contribute to Camille's legal defense fund, though I'd asked my lawyer to make the donations anonymously. I didn't want Camille to know the money was coming from me, but I also didn't want her to have an adequate representation during her appeals process. You're a better man than most people would be in your situation, Bastian had told me. A lot of people would want her to suffer as much as possible. I want her to face consequences for what she did, I'd replied. But I don't want to become someone who takes pleasure in other people's suffering. That's not who I want to be. The appeals process had been lengthy but ultimately unsuccessful. Camille's conviction and sentence had been upheld at every level. She would serve at least 10 years before becoming eligible for parole, and even then, the parole board would take into account the severity of her crimes and her lack of remorse during the trial. Lars's appeals had also been unsuccessful. He would likely spend the rest of his life in prison, which seemed appropriate given the scope of his crimes and the number of lives he'd destroyed. Sometimes I wondered what my life would have been like if none of this had happened. Would Camille and I have stayed married? Would we have had children? Would I have been happy living with someone who was capable of such deception, even if I'd never found out about it? I'd come to believe that the answer to that last question was no. Even if Camille had never tried to poison me, even if I'd never discovered her affair, our marriage had been built on a foundation that wasn't as solid as I'd thought. The woman who could plan my murder was also a woman who could lie about gambling away our savings, who could carry on a secret affair for months, who could look me in the eye every day while planning my destruction. In a strange way, Mathis's warning had saved me from more than just death. It had saved me from wasting more years of my life with someone who didn't deserve my trust or my love. 2 years after the poisoning incident, I felt like I was finally living the life I was meant to live. I was in a healthy relationship with someone who respected and valued me. I had meaningful work that made a difference in other people's lives. I had a home that felt like a sanctuary rather than a place where I had to guard against betrayal. The trauma would always be part of my story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. I'd survived something terrible, and I'd used that survival to build something better. That felt like a victory that Camille and Lars could never take away from me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust someone completely again. 10 years of marriage destroyed by greed and selfishness. But I'm grateful that Mathis spoke up when he did, and I'm grateful that I had the presence of mind to listen to him. Camille writes me letters from prison sometimes, but I throw them away without reading them. I'm not interested in her apologies or explanations. I'm focused on moving forward, on building a new life without her. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, despite everything that happened. I've redecorated, gotten rid of most of the furniture we picked out together, and made it my own space. It's smaller without her, but it's honest. No more lies, no more deception, no more wondering if the person I'm sharing my life with is planning to betray me. I've learned to cook for one, to sleep alone, to make decisions without consulting anyone else. It's been an adjustment, but not an unpleasant one. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of the life someone else wanted me to live. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Mathis hadn't spoken up that first night. Would Camille have gone through with her plan? Would I have woken up to find my bank accounts empty and my wife gone? Would I have spent years wondering what I'd done wrong, why she'd left me? I'll never know, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for Mathis's courage, for Victor's support, for the justice system that worked the way it was supposed to. Most of all, I'm grateful that I trusted my instincts and fought back instead of just accepting what was happening to me.